Good morning. Well, we've been looking at this story, the story of Abraham offering Isaac a sacrifice, taking him up on the mountain, and then God stopping him at the last moment and telling him to offer up a ram which had his head caught in thorns and offer that as a sacrifice instead. And once again, I just want to emphasize that this was the same place where one day Jesus, his head also crowned with thorns, would be offered as sacrifice, this time for the sins of the whole world. At the end of this chapter, as Abraham and his son come back down the mountain, we are told that Abraham receives a message from his brother's family in Haran. And he's told quite simply that his brother Nahor had many children. And one of his sons, called Bethuel, had also had a daughter, and her name was Rebeckah. Again, you see, God is showing us that his plan is working out. The person that Isaac would one day marry, Rebeckah, had been born in Haran, a long way off. And it also shows us that messages were still traveling between these families. And so they were aware of what is happening to each other and what is going on in their lives. Anyway, we come now to chapter 24. And as we look at chapter 24, it tells us quite simply that Abraham and Sarah were growing older. And finally, Sarah dies. She's 127 years of age. Abraham, who comes to her, looks for a place where he can bury her. And he goes to the local inhabitants of that place, and he says to them, I need a place where I can bury my wife. And they say to him, you're a prince amongst us. Remember all those fighting men he had in his household? This was not just one man in a tent. This was a person with great power and a great influence in the area. They said, you are a prince amongst us. We'll give you any of the tombs in our country that you could use. He says, no, he says, on this occasion, even though I've been living in a tent, even though I've been a nomad, I now need to purchase a piece of land where I can, in fact, bury my wife. And in fact, this is what happens. You can read about it and all the process of the developing business transaction as he buys this place and a great cave in that place, the cave of Machpelah. And if you go to Hebron at the present day, you will find there a great big building standing over this cave, the tomb of the patriarchs. Sarah was buried there. Later on, Ishmael and Isaac would bury Abraham there. Jacob, who had gone down to Egypt, he would be buried there. His wife Leah, she too would be buried there. We don't know how many people were buried in this particular cave, but if ever you visit Hebron at the present time and you see the tomb of the patriarchs, somewhere in the depths underneath that tomb lie the bodies of these great people who were the very foundation of what God is going to do in our lives. But time passes, and I've got a bit ahead of myself. Because after Sarah died, and Abram realizing that he too was growing older, he sends his manager, almost like a business associate. He says, I want you to go. Take a lot of produce from the land, take some of the stuff I've got. I want you to go back to my family home in Haran. And I want you to go to the home of my brother. And I want you to speak to the family there, because I want to get a bride for my son Isaac. See, one of the things we have to realize is Abram did not want his son Isaac to marry any of the people living in the country where he was now residing. The Jewish people have always had this strong understanding of what family life is all about. And they know for certain that in a family, one of the most important person for the bringing up and the training of children is, of course, the wife and the mother. She is the one who is going to have influence on the children as they grow. She is the one who is going to put into these children the ideas which govern the family life. And so Abraham is quite careful about this. He says, I do not want to take a woman from the tribes around me. Why? Because the child who will be brought up from that particular family will be worshipping the pagan gods amongst who these people are honoring here in this place. Instead, go back to my family, get a bride for my wife. And the story is told of how the servant travels and finds Rebeckah and brings her back that she can be the wife of Isaac. Later on, of course, we are told that Abraham himself dies, and he is buried by his sons Ishmael and Isaac in the cave of Machpelah. So we go through this story, and the story now changes from Abraham and Sarah to Isaac and Rebeckah, and the story goes on, and we see it developing one stage at a time. Amen.